continue our midweek Bible study and thoughts based on God's teaching. This week,
how to win in your thought life.
It's probably true to say that pretty much everything we go through in life, though there are physical things we go through, it is what happens in our minds, it's what happens in our thought life that dictates whether we are victorious or defeated. Our thought life has a huge impact on whether we get on with life and keep going, or whether we lock down and cease to function, whether we develop growing healthy relationships with others, or whether they increasingly fall into disarray. It all has to do with how we think.
Yeah, our mind is our biggest battleground that we face in life. You know, so often we think we're tied up thinking we've got to do spiritual warfare with this, that and the other, but actually it's our own minds that are our biggest battleground that we have to win victory in. So
tonight our verse is very simply in Romans chapter 12 verse 2, where Paul writes, "Don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is the good and acceptable and perfect will of God." It's all about the mind.
And in saying about renewing our minds, and when we change the way we think, we change the way we act, we change the way we live. And this isn't just about just change your mind a bit and change the way you think a bit, but this is like a complete mind transformation.
There's a lot of this that we'll have already spoken of, we'll have already touched on when we're talking about resisting, standing, being victorious, being a disciple, praying. All the different things we've covered will have touched on these subjects, so don't be surprised tonight if some of the things we talk about you've heard us speak about before. This is such an important area. This is the place. This is the place. Your mind, my mind, that's the place where either we win through in our Christianity or we don't. It's the place where either we take captivity captive just as Jesus did, or we become captives to our own thoughts. This is the big issue. If I can get a hold of my thinking and learn to develop healthy patterns of thought, then I'm going to see myself victorious and winning through. If not, I'm going to be constantly at the beck and call of my mind as my thoughts run riot through my head.
Yeah. And for any of you who've ever tried to give up a bad habit, in the same way you can give up a bad habit or something you don't want in your life.
Yeah.
Like not taking sugar in your tea anymore. You can take your thoughts captive and you can take control of your mind in the same way. And for those of you that have managed to win the battle of giving up smoking, then that is a harder battle than taking your thoughts captive.
There's a lot of different people over the centuries have accomplished quite astounding things, whether it's climbing to the top of the mountain first, reaching the North Pole, rowing across the Atlantic Ocean, swimming the English Channel, you name it. There's loads and loads of achievements that you can find through the history books, and the one thing that characterizes all of those who were successful is this: they had a strong sense of will and determination.
Yeah.
They had focus and presence of mind. That's all it is.
Yeah, they determined in their minds that they were going to achieve this and nothing was going to stand in the way.
And once you can capture that and understand that, apply it to your own life, you will be more victorious than you ever imagined. You will achieve more for God than you ever thought you were ever capable of, simply because you learn to put your will into the things you were determined to achieve, and you refuse to be held by those things that once tormented and troubled you. What we're talking about is good mental health.
Yeah, and see, the way you think shouldn't be dictated by your situation. Like we read of the apostles in prison, and they're singing God's praises. They've been beaten, they're in shackles, and they're praising God because it's all about how you think and how you see yourself through God's eyes and see your situation through God's eyes.
So one of the first things we want to look at is dealing with desire. And you say, well, I thought desire came from the heart and from feelings. Well, in a way it does. But what we do with desire isn't decided by how we feel. It's decided by how we think. What I become in life has to very much do with how I think. God says in the Proverbs, as a man thinks, so he is. So learning to think well, learning to master our thought life, helps us to become the men and women of God that we long to be.
Yeah, if I think always defeated thoughts, and I think always poorly of myself and poorly of others, then that's going to come out in everything that I say and do and the decisions that I make in life.
Definitely. So dealing with our desires. Jesus spoke, Matthew tells us, Jesus talked about the parable of the sower. And he said this, he said, explaining to the disciples all about the parable of the seed, he said, the seed sown among the thorns is the one who hears the word, but the worries of life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke the word and it becomes unfruitful. And Mark, he tells us something similar, and he says the worries of this life, the deceitfulness of wealth, and the desire for other things come and choke the word. In other words, if I'm always obsessing about my next car, my next promotion or
next holiday,
whatever it is that's on my mind that I want. So Jesus was talking about this idea of the things that often have to do with desire actually tying us up and choking the effectiveness of God's word out of our lives. In other words, the things we hear that would be so much more beneficial to us get wiped out by the things we obsess over, the things we long for, the things we spend all our time yearning for. And so learning to deal with that has got to be a principal issue for us. Our desires need to be put in check.
You know, if you spend your Sunday evening in church listening to the Word of God and absorbing that and having an experience in the presence of God, and then the minute you leave, you're on the phone catching up on the latest gossip, or you're catching up on all your latest soap operas with all the misery and stories that they bring, then the Word of God that's been sown is just choked over with other desires and other cares.
And James writing tells us this, that each person is tempted when they're lured and enticed by their own desires. It's not that, oh, I don't know how to resist this thing that's come on me. It's no, this thing is in you, this longing, this yearning. I know that the things that I have to deal with in my life, the things I have to put to death, as Paul says, the old flesh, the old desires that I once fed, I now have to put them to death. If I spend all my time thinking about them but not doing them, I'll put myself into a terrible state, because what happens is I'm full of turmoil because I want something, because I'm always thinking about it. I'm not acting on it, but I'm thinking about it. And so I never really progress because I'm always hung up on the thing I desire most.
You're always living in that state of battle rather than a state of victory.
Whereas once I stop those things from spending time in I give them an eviction notice. I stop them from spending time in my thoughts, and I say, you know what, I don't want to dwell on those things, because the more I dwell on them, the more angry, or the more longing, or the more whatever it causes, it needs to stop.
You know, your mind is a bit like a garden, and in looking after your garden, you have to pull the weeds out. You have to sow the things that you want to be there. You have to prune back things that are getting overgrown, and it's the same with our thoughts. We need to trim back things that are beginning to take over and maybe become an obsession. We have to weed out those things that shouldn't be there and that are spoiling it, and we have to sow in those good things, those things that are beneficial to us and to those around us.
And so Peter writes in his first epistle, and he says, as obedient children, don't conform to the passions of your former ignorance. And that's what he calls it, former ignorance. In other words, when you didn't know any better, you just did it. Now you know better, don't do it. Don't let it have room. Don't give it space. It's a squatter, not a tenant. It ain't paying rent. It's there for your destruction, not your blessing. Get rid of it. Make room for better things in your mind. So dealing with desires, dealing with anxiety, and when we talk about anxiety, I'm not just talking about stress and worry, but all those different forms of anxiety that filter in different ways. And of course we're told be anxious for nothing, and Paul helps us in his letter to Philippians by saying, but in everything with prayer, supplication and thanksgiving. And we'll talk about those things a little bit later on as we look more at how to deal with our thought processes and developing a healthy mental attitude about things. And not just desires, not just anxiety, but also our depressions. Depression isn't really anxiety. Anxiety is more stress. But depression, negativity, dealing with negativity, dealing with a sense of not good enough, a sense of not worth enough, a sense of not good looking enough.
And restlessness as well is another one. Many of us have quite restless minds, and we're always having to change the things around us. And constantly having to change to keep ourselves happy, and having quite that restless mind. That's something else that we need to get victory over.
So all the things that lead us into the more negative aspects of our life, you can almost guarantee they come out of unhealthy thought patterns, unhealthy thought processes. And all the things that lead to a goodly, godly, successful life. And when I say successful, I don't mean success like the world, brand new Jaguar, holiday home in the Mediterranean and all that kind of stuff. I just mean satisfied, at peace, knowing what it is to be content. That's what success looks like in healthy thinking.
See, we often have desires for things of this world, material things, holidays, experiences and so on. But what we should have are desires, godly desires to be or to do something for God.
So tonight I'm just going to share with you 6 steps. We could add so many more things in here. So firstly, let me be clear here. This is something you can do.
Yeah.
Manage your thought life. Sounds good, doesn't it? You know, before I was a Christian, my late grandmother would come and visit us on a regular basis, and she had a whole TV schedule. She would come every week, same time. Always loved to see her. It was great to spend time with her. But I would guarantee you, the one thing as children we always despaired over was that she would come with a TV schedule. She didn't bring a TV Times or a newspaper with the programs on. She just knew up here the programs, and she lived her life by when the TV programs were on. Back then video recorders weren't such a big thing. They were quite new out. DVDs were non-existent. We hadn't had colour tellies that long, and to be honest with you, she would walk round and she'd have this permanent schedule in her head of when her favourite programmes were on. So when she came to visit, she would tell us, oh, put such and such a channel on because this is going to be on in a minute. And over the years, I've met so many people whose minds are completely focused and ordered, but they're focused and ordered on the TV or on the sports calendar or the results on a Saturday or the betting program and the horse races. It's amazing how when people are very passionate and focused about something, their minds become managed and focused so much on that schedule. And it's almost like everything that they have is ordered by those things. But we're told the steps of a righteous man are ordered by the Lord. And so it's time for us to manage our thinking. Look at how we think. It's not something that just happens to you. It's something you allow. It's something you allow space in your thought processes. And so when you're thinking, consider what you're thinking.
Because, Jesus says, to think adulterous thoughts is this as bad as to go and carry out the act. Don't even think it. And you know, we often think, what would Jesus do in our actual actions? But we should bear that in mind in our thoughts as well. Would Jesus think this? Would I be ashamed if Jesus was here right now and saw my thoughts? And actually, he does.
Yeah.
And we need to bear that in mind, that if we're thinking stuff that is not honouring, and we would be totally humiliated if Jesus saw it, then stop doing it because he's seen it.
Yeah, one great challenge to start making us think about whether we should manage our minds and get a grip of our thoughts is to imagine our whole thought life being played out like a cinema in front of everybody. Whoa! There'd be non-righteous, no, not one. So this first idea then is taking charge of your mind. So it's not blaming everybody else for the way we think. We're a very voyeuristic society. What I mean by that is whether it's fly on the wall stuff. That's why Big Brother is so popular on TV, because as a nation we love to just watch other people. Yeah. That's why social media and what do they call it? TikTok and Instagram. That's why they're so popular, because people just love to sit and look at other people's lives. We're very nosy. We like to see things. But the problem is, when we look, we often see things that begin to filter into here. And actually what we want to do is look away now. Don't let that stuff in. It's the same in so many things. It's the same with our ears, what we hear. We'll talk about that a little bit more later on. In Corinthians, Paul writes in his second letter to the Corinthians, we are destroying speculation and every lofty thing or every lofty thought that is raised up against the knowledge of God. And we are taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. If I'm managing my mind, you can't just let your thoughts do what they want. You have to manage them. There needs to be structure and there needs to be discipline. And the more we appreciate that the structure and discipline is protecting us and helping us, the more we will really begin to appreciate and enjoy the fact that it's there.
And I just want to say, especially to ladies, our emotions do not dictate our thoughts.
No.
There are many women who every month get very angry and very depressed because of hormones and so on, and allow their emotions to take over. But you need to take that captive, take those thoughts captive. Give your husbands and your family a bit of a break. It's we shouldn't be ruled by emotions, but we should be ruled by the thoughts that we take captive and surrender to God.
And on that score, men, you know, if you have anger issues, if you have problems with reacting all the time and overreacting, you know, one of the greatest mantras I ever learned, not that a mantra is a good thing because it's Eastern meditation.
Well, don't call it a mantra, technique.
No, one of the greatest techniques then that I ever learned was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I feel so much better again. Count to 10. Walk away.
Yeah.
Don't stay in the argument. Be the bigger person. If there's an argument going on and your thoughts are all firing up all those wrong things, walk away. Don't let it get the better of you. Make the choice so that your thoughts are protected, rather than letting your thoughts become murderous. Or unpleasant.
Because you cannot blame someone else for the thoughts you have chosen to think.
Charis' mother raised them all with a really challenging way of looking at those kind of things.
Yeah, having grown up as the only girl with 6 brothers, and sometimes it'd be, Mommy's annoying me. No, you're allowing yourself to be annoyed. And that was our answer every time to each one of us. We were allowing ourselves to get angry and to be annoyed. We had made that choice.
So now we've talked about managing, that is taking responsibility for what goes on in our heads. Now I know that for some of you, this isn't going to be as straightforward as just simply watching a video and I've got this, but it's going to help you a lot just learning these things. It's going to help. There are other things that can go on in addition to this, and we'll maybe mention them at the end. But right now, managing our thought life, taking charge of our thoughts, the second thing that comes with it is replacing the negative thoughts. Whether that's about yourself, whether that's towards others, or everything else. It doesn't matter where your negativity is focused. Deal with it.
You know, at the moment on social media, there's so much negativity towards our government, but the Bible doesn't say be negative about your government and those over it. It says pray for them.
Yeah. It's a real challenge, and I realise that our press and our media do not help because they feed on the negative. The adage used to be, no news is good news.
Well, they like to try and encourage us to have their opinion, so a certain opinion will be prominent in the media because that's the opinion they want us all to have.
And it's always based on negative things. You'll notice this. It's always based on the negative, not on positive things. It's not, oh, we should all do this because this would be great. It's like, oh, isn't that horrible? We should get rid of that person, or we should deal with that because that's always the negative. And when the press feed our minds so much with negativity, it's no wonder that our society is struggling with anxiety, depression, with dysfunctionality, because everybody's just filled with a negative way of thinking.
Yeah.
But Jesus Christ says, I come to give you life, not death.
Yeah.
I've come to give you hope and joy and peace, not misery and depression and hopelessness. Christianity is about moving away from the negative and seeing the positive. So getting rid of negative thoughts is the first thing we need to start doing. Getting rid of the weeds, as Charis said. Mm-hmm. So we've got to hand over, trade in our old perceptions. That's our old thoughts and opinions, our old ideas, our old beliefs, and our old self-centered attitudes. We're going to hand them all in and trade them for new godly ones.
You know, when you're suffering with negative thoughts, and if you find it hard just to take that, say, no, I'm not thinking that, start praising God. Start singing some of those choruses you know and love. You know, that's one of the quickest ways to completely change your mood, to change your outlook on life, for God's presence to come flooding into your house or wherever you happen to be at the time, and just to completely change your mind around.
Our grandson is our first grandson. He's a very busy little boy and quite willful, very inquisitive. And the more the more he learns, as he grows bigger, the more he learns he can do, the more he wants to do. He wants to go to places he's not allowed to go, climb over the things he's not allowed to climb over, because we don't want him to put himself in danger. And so he's learning the word no, and he doesn't like it. But what we found is the most excellent technique.
It's to distract him.
Distraction.
Give him something else that appeals to him more. And it's the same with your thought.
Absolutely.
Something else that appeals to you more, but something godly.
And if you've got something that you can do, a chore, a task, or a hobby that requires some time and focus, anything that will take you away from temptations, destructive thoughts, troublesome mind, or all those things that kind of go on in here that really kind of pull you apart.
Yeah.
And you can't manage your mind to say stop and put the brakes on those thoughts, which is challenging for many people. Mental discipline is an exercise that requires practice. It's not something that just happens because you decided to do it. It has to be worked and developed like anything else.
Yeah. You know, if you're feeling depressed about your life and how the situation you're in, go and do something for somebody else who's in a worse situation. It'll soon take your mind off the way you're feeling.
And that's all about how we replace the negative thoughts. The government had a great catchphrase through the late 80s and 90s with just say no. And sometimes that's what it takes, is learning to say no to yourself.
Sorry, I've got that song stuck in my head now.
Just say no. Yeah. You have to manage your mind.
It's better than the SpongeBob song.
Oh, don't go there. So the third thought in how to help us become winners in our thoughts is make a conscious effort to find things to love or like and appreciate. So particularly when it comes to negativity, negative thoughts about ourselves, negative thoughts about others, and
what we haven't got, and
I
what
think
we're lacking. And
I think we'll follow on. Nathan and Joe gave us a great Bible study the other week on seeing ourselves as God sees us, which is all about dealing with some of the negatives that so often haunt us. But drawing out on that, this idea that we make a conscious effort. We actively put our will into finding good, looking for positives, seeking for things that we can appreciate. Paul understood this. He says, when he writes to the Philippians, chapter 4 and verses 8 and 9, he said, finally, brothers, whatever things are true. Well, that's the BBC News getting switched off then, isn't it? Whatever things are noble, well, that's the rest of the news media going off as well. Whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report. If there is any virtue and if there is anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. The things which you learned and received and heard and saw in me, these do, says Paul, and the God of peace will be with you. It's all about when your house is wobbly and it's all falling apart, you don't just leave it falling apart. You dig down, you pull out the poor foundation and you replace it with new, good foundations. You have to put something in there. You can't leave your mind empty.
But if it's empty, it leaves too much room for other people to go wandering around in there.
So this idea then about finding positive things. Finding positive things about others. I've noticed that we live in a society, and particularly in the wider local community, where being negative about other people is almost a national sport. Never mind rugby, the national sport is speaking negatively about other people.
Especially if you think that person is better than you in some way. Rather than striving to raise ourselves, we tend to pull other people down.
So what we're saying is, rather than looking at the negative, you see what's good about them. And if you really, and let's be honest, come on, you can't tell me there's not good in most people somewhere. But if you really can't find anything good about them, you look at them the way Jesus looks at them, and you think, Jesus died for them.
Yeah.
He thinks they're worth something even if you don't.
If they're worth the blood of Jesus, they're worth our love and compassion.
And so it's seeing the positive, finding good.
When I worked as a childminder a few years ago, there was we supported each other as a group of childminders, and there was one lady there, and she often had quite naughty children, and she said to us all one day that she would only ever take a child if she could find something in them that she liked and loved, and she'd never found a child yet that didn't have something in them that she couldn't love. So no matter how naughty they were, there was always something good in them, something that she could love about that child. And that's how we need to be about everybody. You know, no matter how much people wind us up and push our buttons, it's us that's allowing them to push the buttons, incidentally, but there's something good in them.
You need to learn to see the good in you.
Yeah.
One of the biggest challenges I find for so many is they struggle to see good. They lack confidence in themselves. They lack confidence in their looks, their abilities, their talents. The truth is that you're amazing.
Yeah.
God made you that way. And there's no way you should be telling yourself that you're no good when God says you're amazing. So I just encourage you, don't be overwhelmed by what we're talking about. We'll talk more on this subject again, I'm sure. But tonight, just want to encourage you as we draw this evening to a close. We're praying for you. God's watching over you. And I pray right now, especially for those who have trouble with their thought life, that God would calm the storms in your mind. That God would pour peace into the troublesome thoughts.
Yeah.
That God would bind and arrest the wicked thoughts.
Yeah.
That God would deal with those thoughts that make for a wrong attitude in your life. And that he would pour in his peace. And that you would find more and more gratitude through his grace. To see positives. To see good in yourself and in others. May the Lord keep you. May the Lord bless you and give you peace. We'll see you soon.
Ta-da.
Goodbye.